Thank you for inviting me, and it's good to see you all here. It seems a very good audience, both in number as well as different sections, to discuss a very important issue. I actually chair a think tank from Singapore. So frankly, when I told Singaporean friends that I'm coming up to Hanoi to talk about agriculture, they were kind of shaking their heads. What do Singaporeans know about agriculture? Well, we know how important it is to eat. And I think that's something we all understand in the world. We have, in a sense, a real connection to the region around us, ASEAN, including, of course, our host country, Vietnam. The products of farm to table is really something that visits all of us, makes it very important for us to understand where the food is coming from, who is growing it, what conditions, both of the soil and of markets, make it possible to have enough food, sufficient, stable prices for both the supplier and the consumer, and in the end, sustainability in terms not only of the environment, especially climate change, but also sustainability in terms of the people and the society from which the growers come from. So I'm very happy to be here to moderate this first opening panel on behalf of the organizers. We're going to have a good discussion. The names of the panelists were on the floor, but apparently my face is there now. So if I could call them up in order of their speaking. First is Mr. Tran Phuong, who is Deputy CEO of BIDV, a major bank here in Vietnam that supplies loans not only to investment and construction, but also to the agricultural sector. And this is what the Deputy Minister said, the importance of investment in the agricultural sector. The second speaker is a good friend from Malaysia, Tan Sri Dr. Muhammad Munir Abdul Majid. Munir also has been a banker, but despite that, he is a very nice chap who understands ASEAN very deeply and is currently the chairman of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, given that Malaysia, his country, is currently the ASEAN chair. He is also still the chairman of a bank in Malaysia, and he is the chairperson of the CIMB ASEAN Research Institute, CHARI, which tries to understand the different sectors of ASEAN. Thank you, Munir, for joining us from Malaysia. The third speaker is a man I just met, but I've heard many things about, very good things about, Dr. Peter Timmer, a Cabot Professor Emeritus from Harvard University. Peter really is an expert not only about rice, but a range of different crops and commodities. Please, Peter. He also lives in a rather rural place, I think it's Sonoma Valley, California. The fourth speaker is a friend from Singapore, David Q, Vice President of Sustainable Businesses and Communications, Unilever. David, welcome. And last but not least is the Executive Director of CropLife Asia, also based in Singapore, Mr. Tan Siang Hee. Please allow me to take a seat there. I had a microphone, but in the movement upstage, it suddenly dropped off. I think the rest are mic'd up, so they should be all right. I'll look for the mic later. Our format will be that we'll give each of the presenters about 2 to 3 minutes each to initially start us off. Secondly, we will then have a bit of discussion among ourselves, and then we open up to Pigeonhole. I've also forgot something in my rush to come up here. I left my little iPad mini on the desk, so I'll just nip off stage in a while to get it. Meanwhile, I'd like to start off with Tran Phuong. Phuong, you are the Deputy CEO of a major bank in Vietnam, our host country, that supplies investment capital to the farmers. Vietnam has really progressed. It's developed a market of commodities and other things. What are the key issues you face as a bank in terms of reaching out to the sector?
Good morning, everyone. It is good question. And on behalf of the management of the bank BIDV, we'd like to share with you some information about the bank and also what we are facing up to, nowadays in order to finance to the rural and agricultural sector. First of all, BIDV was established in 1957, and we initially state-owned bank. But since December 2011, BIDV became a joint venture bank after the very successful IPO in December 2011. And we list our share in the stock exchange Ho Chi Minh City in 2014. And for our history, we have measured focusing on for the development of the whole country regarding the construction, transportation, focusing on the big corporations, SMEs, and retails for individuals, consumers. In the strategy of the bank, now we have very strong and consistent direction in which we focus on agriculture and rural development of the country. And for the financial year 2014, what we have is we had 15% of the total outstanding loans of the bank is for the agriculture sector. That is quite significant ratio comparing to other peers in the market. Secondly, we have been chosen as a contact point for the World Bank Rural Development Project 10 years ago, and through 3 phases of the World Bank projects, with a catalyst of more than $580 million funded by the World Bank, the bank BIDV, together with commercial banks in Vietnam, have lent to the farmers and the corporations regarding the rural areas up to $2.1 billion equivalent. So we got quite variety and significant experience in financing to the rural area. And what we are facing now at the moment, as you in the morning session, we mentioned about the difficulties of the climate change, for the consumption needs, and also for the structure and cooperation between governments, companies, and farmers in producing more and more production to the region, and also to get the farmers having more income. So from our perspectives, what we see is the commercial banks in the region should have the clear strategy in order to facilitate the corporations. In here, what we see is not only the companies with high technology to focus on the agriculture, but also we see we need to rearrange for the distribution channels, especially in Vietnam. We still face a lot of issues in the distribution, so that the value chain should be prioritized and should be saving the efforts and having more income towards the farmers. So what we see is, for the bank perspective, the lending is there in the next 5 years. The strategy direction is we will put annually 20% the growth on rural and agricultural sector, right? But what we see is the structure in what kind of products is very important, and the products should be based on the needs from requirements of the global markets. So what we see is for the ASEAN countries accounts for 45% of the total export on rice, right? But how to restructure the rice based on what kind of rice, and European needs, American, Japanese want to have from ASEAN. So that is very important. So based on the bankers' perspective, we need to be very clear on the structure of the products we will invest in. Thank you.
ask one more? May I ask one more question? May I ask one more question before we move on to the next panelist? Sometimes even when prices go up, the farmers and the farms don't seem to actually benefit very much. Is there a pattern you see in your bank's lending? How we can make sure that the prices do get, the value chain does get to the farmers?
That is a very good idea. When BIDV ourselves think that when we manage the value chain, that means we have very close contact with the companies who borrow our money, right? The commercial bank monies. At the same time, we finance to the farmers. And of course, there would be something like the contract between, the distributor, the farmers, and also for the bankers, right? And of course, we mentioned to the scientists who, provide the technology for the process. So in here, there should be, if we are here, to support for the value chain, we should realize and distinguish which one, the elements, the factors, will be, for their certain role. And when we have the income from the cash flow from the companies, and we have the income from the farmers, we should be very well to manage the cash flow in order to, facilitate for the whole value chain.
Thank you very much. So we move on to the next speaker, or the next panelist, Tan Sri. Tan Sri, you cover ASEAN and the AEC very broadly. How do you feel about agriculture and sustainability?
Thank you, Simon. I hope everyone can hear me, because good. I am here in my capacity as chairman of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, and I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak at this forum in that capacity. And I would try to make 3 points, Simon, very quickly. The first point is the ASEAN decision-making process, official level. Okay. The second point is how the private sector comes into that process, if at all, which is obviously germane to our discussion in respect of collaboration, public-private. And the third point would relate to the first speaker's comment, finance, for small and medium enterprises. Now, the ASEAN meetings, there are plenty of them. There are well over 1,000 every year. And if you look at the chart of the ASEAN decision-making process leading up to the ASEAN Leaders Summit, you'll see a proliferation of working groups and of task forces, high-level task forces, low-level task forces, you name it. And it's really quite complicated and complex. And before it reaches the level of the leaders, there are at least 10 ministries involved, reaching upwards from the various working groups and so on. Now, there are certain issues about whether these working groups talk to each other, two, whether the ministers talk to each other. We know the leaders talk to each other, but we wonder whether they listen to each other, And so we have this problem about making sure that this process, this structure, becomes more intense and more committed in the objectives that they set for themselves. This is something that must be done, I believe, if it hasn't happened enough, and must be done in the post-2015 ASEAN to make sure that there is this coordination among the various groups. Now, the second bit is the private sector, okay, how the private sector is involved. I mean, the ASEAN Business Advisory Council is supposed to be, what's the word? I think it's a mandated representative of the private sector, mandated by the leaders of ASEAN. Now, let me tell you, I mean, I'm chairman this year because Malaysia is the chair of ASEAN, and I look at the amount of meetings that take place, the amount of private sector representation there is in the discussion, I see very little representation on agriculture. There's hardly any. We meet US ASEAN Business Council, Japan, you name it, joint business councils we call it. Agriculture doesn't figure very strongly in such discussions. We meet associates like the ASEAN Business Club and so on. They are very elite type companies, not very involved in agriculture, yet there's nothing on agriculture. And agriculture is one of the priority integration sectors, agriculture and the agribusiness. ASEAN seems to have forgotten, both at the public and the private sector level, the importance that it itself had placed on agriculture. This has to be revived. You would have noticed yesterday, and I see it's in the papers today, the four CLMV countries met in Myanmar, and today I think the Thai Prime Minister joins them. And these are countries which are very much involved in agriculture, particularly in rice production. And I notice in their statement after their meeting, they mentioned about at least 10 sectors that they are covering in their discussions in respect of the Mekong Cooperation Framework. And agriculture is just one of them. How much attention do they themselves, in a concentrated fashion, give to agriculture in their discussions? Not to mention ASEAN at large, just in terms of these smaller groups that meet. And therefore, I think there is a need to really inject the importance of agriculture into the process of discussions and decision making and follow through in the ASEAN process. Now, at the moment, the ASEAN officials are working on a draft on the post-2015 AEC. This is a very good time to put in that bit about agriculture. There's some reference I've seen in sort of abridged versions of this draft. There's some reference to sustainable development, but I wonder how much there is on agriculture. The ASEAN Business Advisory Council is engaging the officials and the ASEAN economic ministers when they meet in Kuala Lumpur from August 22nd to ensure that that draft that finally goes for approval to the leaders in November, on November 22nd, contains things of import to the private sector, particularly now in our respect here in regard to agriculture. Now the third point, okay, Simon, is finance. Now, everywhere I go, everywhere ASEAN Bank goes, access to finance for SMEs is the biggest, oft repeated issue. It comes up again and again ad nauseum. It's been going on for years and years. So I've got the ASEAN Bank to back me in my proposal to have an ASEAN MSME bank. Of course, I don't rely at all on the public funds to set this up because it'll take like forever, but it's going to be private sector driven, and it may very well not be a physical conventional bank. It might be a virtual bank, and it will address the needs of the micro, small and medium enterprises. And it will not be deposit taking, might just be crowdfunding instead, and you have to use the new means of technology to bring your finance to the SMEs that need it. And of course, obviously, they will also include the agricultural sector in respect of these SMEs. So what this bank needs, not money from the public sector, not even an ordinary license in terms of deposit taking, but just regulatory space to breathe, to operate, to reach out and make finance available to micro, small and medium enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you, Munir. So as ASEAN community is coming into reality by the end of this year. He says that the agenda for agriculture is there, but as a way it's kind of slipped. It's not been as much priority as he hopes. It can be caught up, and the vital question of financing for this sector could be addressed either at the national level by a more innovative virtual micro and small bank that he's discussed briefly. Our next speaker will be Professor Timmer from Harvard. Please, Peter.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation to the panel. Simon wondered why somebody from Singapore might be running a panel on food and agriculture. You might wonder why somebody from Harvard is interested in agriculture as well. We don't have a lot of farmers represented either on the faculty or even among the students. I've been working in the region since 1970, started with the National Planning Agency in Indonesia, and my task always was to work on the role of agriculture in the overall development of the economy. I'm not a production specialist, but I work on what happens once it leaves the farm through the processing sector into food consumption. And so that's the perspective I'm going to bring, an economy-wide perspective on agriculture as the provider of the food that we are all interested in consuming. The focus of the entire conference, and even starting with the panel this morning, is on the role of collaboration for international competitiveness. How can we collaborate across countries within ASEAN in order to ensure sustainability and global competitiveness for the food and agricultural sectors? I would urge that we ask that question in the context of three different levels of discussion. The first is, what's the role of domestic policies within individual countries vis-a-vis collaboration within the ASEAN community? What is it that countries have to get right before collaboration can be effective? And I would argue that the reason, as Tan Sri points out, agriculture isn't talked about very much in ASEAN venues because agriculture is quintessentially a domestic policy item. It's incredibly important politically in all of these countries, and none of these countries are willing to hand over any sovereignty with respect to agriculture and food policy to a regional body. That's going to be a very difficult challenge as the AEC starts and we try to integrate the agricultural economies into a freer trade environment. I work country by country, and I am very impressed just by how important agriculture is when you get inside the country and how it does not surface very much once you get to the collaboration side. The second level that I think we need to think about is, what is the appropriate role for the public sector and what is the appropriate role for the private sector? And thinking about those separately, because we expect public policy to represent the interests of the entire society. I'm not saying that that's how it works. I'm saying that's what we try, that's our goal, that's our expectation. And we expect the private sector then to work within that framework, efficiently investing and carrying out efficiently all the tasks it takes to make a market economy work on behalf of farmers, traders, and consumers. And so I think it's important that we understand there are separate tasks for those two parties within the economy. And then we ask, okay, given that that's true, what then is the scope for private-public partnerships? Where do those work? What type of incentive structures have to be on the table? And so how do we make private-public partnerships work? Because it's very clear that if you've got all these other things in place, that is the way forward to sustainable food and agricultural development. I'm going to talk to you later after lunch, so I won't take any more of the time. But I do think we need to be clear on which part of the economy we're talking about, what kind of policy we're talking about, and who the actors are going to be and how they interact. Leave it at that. Thanks.
Peter, thank you very much for that questioning view that first, before we talk about ASEAN cooperation, we must get each country must get their national policies correct, and that this tends to be an area of, kind of very sensitive priorities domestically, relating both to the economy as well as the politics in the end. And we see this, in the European Union and Japan and many other countries. Yeah. The next view comes from quite a different angle, I hope. Unilever is a major manufacturer, a purchaser of commodities across the world, and David Q is the Vice President for both Sustainability and Corporate Affairs based out of Singapore. David?
Hi, thanks, Simon. Thanks first for inviting me and having Unilever here on the panel. So for those of you who don't know us, we are an Anglo-Dutch company. We have about 400 brands. We sell in about 190 countries, and about 2 billion people every day use one of our products. We have a global commitment to sustainable development and sustainable sourcing. So we have committed that we will source 100% of our agricultural raw materials sustainably by 2020. We are about halfway in that journey. We launched that process in 2010. So over 10 years, we've moved from about 18% to about 47% of agricultural raw materials sustainably sourced. I think it's good that we have that commitment, but I think even more important than that is that we believe that that is a source of competitive advantage for us. So we believe that it is better business, we believe that it drives consumer preference, it drives better products that we can give to our consumers. And we've spent, I think, quite a few years sort of proving that business case. The way we see it is in three sort of segments. So we call it our footprint, our handprint, and our blueprint. And in our footprint portion is where we invest in sustainable sourcing, we invest in eco-efficient manufacturing, we've cut our CO2 emissions, our water use in production and so on. And our sustainable sourcing ambitions sit within what we call our footprint portion. Then in our handprint portion is where we translate all of that into how we communicate to consumers and how we go to market with our brands. And that's where we believe that it makes a competitive difference for us in the marketplace. So for example, we know that consumers feel that sustainably sourced tomatoes taste better and are better for them. And therefore they're willing to pay more, or they are more loyal to brands that have sustainably sourced ingredients. So that's what we call sort of the handprint portion of our plan. And then the third portion of our plan is what we call the blueprint, which is where collaboration, public-private partnerships, and industry transformation sits. And that's where we have the ambition to work with NGOs and governments to transform supply chains so that we can create sustainable supply chains in places like Southeast Asia, but also everywhere in the world. And I think if you look at traditionally export competitiveness, you look at quality, you look at price. But more and more, I think you'll find that sustainable supply chains is a differentiator in export competitiveness. So you'll see, I think the most, or one of the most obvious examples is in timber, where rather than call it sustainable, they just call it illegal. And isn't that something that we can apply, I think, more broadly in other areas as well? So I'll leave that short comments, and we can have a discussion later.
Thank you, David. A very important perspective from a global company that tells us that sustainability is not only an issue for the farmers or for the NGOs, but starts to matter for the company itself as well as the ultimate consumers that value their products. The last but certainly not least speaker is Yang He from the CropLife Asia, based out of Singapore. Mr. Tan, Dr. Tan, please.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to be here to share with you the challenges in the agriculture space. I work with CropLife Asia. We represent the major technology provider in the crop protection and biotechnology sector. So I represent companies like DuPont, Syngenta, Monsanto, BASF, Dow, Sumitomo, FMC, and we are present in 91 countries across the region. And on the farmer side, our vision is to ensure that farmers have the state of the art.
I'm not very, can you all hear him in the back? The microphone's very bad.
Yeah,
I think you
okay.
reach that one.
Sorry. So our vision is to ensure that farmers have the most and updated innovation for them to cultivate, to grow, so that in a sustainably manner to ensure secure food supply throughout the region into the population. At the end of the day, farmers are our best friend. We should thank them 3 times a day because we wake up for breakfast, we wake up for lunch, we wake up for dinner, and food is always on the table. We need to be thankful that they are there striving to ensure that we have safe and secure food. With that, I want to go back a bit to Tan Sri's comment about ASEAN. In the next 10 years from now, ASEAN's economic will be equivalent in terms of GDP, will be substantially equivalent to UK. And we will have tremendous opportunity to bring the agriculture GDP to the next level. Having said that, 40% of our agriculture, the populations are involved in agriculture in Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia, and it contributes to a significant amount of GDP. But when you look at the value capture for those countries, you look at why Holland, per capita or per worker in agriculture, is at $60,000 US. You look at Australia, it's at $56,000 per worker in agriculture related. Then you come to Malaysia, with one of the palm oil big boys. Per worker contribution is at $1,000 US. Then you go down to Laos, and even today in Myanmar, it's at $500 US. Where are we losing the opportunity to capitalize the whole GDP into the next level and between the whole ASEAN into the next level of productivity? And where like countries like Australia is now being a fruit basket for many, many countries, not only for Asia, even for European community. So that poses a tremendous opportunity for us to deliver state-of-the-art technology into the hands of farmers so that they can produce at productivity level. But again, productivity is not the end discussion. It's the whole supply chain that we hear today is by giving good seeds, by giving good inputs, by going good agriculture practice does not translate to farmer gaining in terms of income. So the whole value chain needs to play its role in upgrading the structure from cold chain to post-harvest protection and getting to market. That's where the discussion where Prof. Timmer says is, how do we capture that value? But the problem again goes back to ASEAN. I've been working with ASEAN for the past 10 years on harmonization of MRL, and ASEAN has been a very, very good partner. The biggest challenge is sovereign rights. A lot of things are agreed upon at ASEAN level does not translate to implementing regulation, and therefore creates a different barrier for operation. And how that poses the question that how does ASEAN wants to become a single trade zone for us to enhance our internal trade and for us to capitalize on the full export potential? So ASEAN has to come up with a lot of meetings are happening, but how do you get that internal discussion to collaborate and have a harmonized region? At the end of the day today, the regulatory environment is very challenging. We are having resource challenge, capacity and capability challenge. We need to be able to find a framework for all of us to share that expertise, the regulatory restriction that we see, become more effective and efficient between that region. That hopefully will translate or become reality when we look at ASEAN 2015 and beyond in a very, very short timeline. Number 2 is a lot of people tend to lump agriculture in broad brush. But agriculture has, let me break it down to 3 communities. First, it's a self-sustaining community whereby it's a local supplier for local market. 2 is where agriculture is entrepreneurial. Agriculture is business. This is where we want to develop the next frontier of agriculture whereby his banking loan can come and provide SME for us to go into a global market. Then the third group of people is who wants to be a global player. These 3 cannot be lumped together with a single policy. We need to separate out because they need different initiatives, different incentives in order for us to propel. If you're a country, you look at Thailand today, why are they a major exporter of fruits? For palm oil in Indonesia, a different set of policy. If you want agriculture to be the central GDP, it has to be a different framework to play that level of investment. So with that, I will, a short discussion, maybe we can elaborate a bit more, but fundamentally we're calling out is you cannot have a single policy for agriculture throughout the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jiang He. Gentlemen, I told you earlier that we were going to use this pigeonhole to advertise, but sadly my internet stopped working, my Wi-Fi stopped working in this room. So we're going to have to be a bit old-fashioned about it. There are some roving microphones, I believe. If not, I'll play Oprah Winfrey and run up and down. But meanwhile, could I put one question to them first while you're thinking about your question? If I could change one thing about agriculture in ASEAN, either at the national level or at the ASEAN level, what would you want me to do? Could I start really with Peter and then come around to whoever wants to answer?
I think what would change the nature of relative competitiveness across the countries in ASEAN would be if we could have a free trade zone for rice.
A free trade zone for rice. That's a tough one. As you know, rice for Asians is like, the iron rice bowl. And we had a spike maybe a decade ago. And so it is a big challenge. I mean, this is the kind of answer I like, that, to get that done, so many other things would have to fall in place.
I mean, the reason for that is rice is such an important ingredient in the cost of living and in the cost of industrial wages that Indonesia's lack of competitiveness in labor-intensive fruits and vegetables is precisely because it's a high-cost economy.
Yes.
And if we wanted to equalize the competitiveness across the region, we need to deal with those high costs. That's the basic argument.
Jiang He, would you like to respond to that? Either to the rice idea or come up to your own one thing you'd want them to do.
For me, is the regulatory environment needs to come together. Right now, we are too much behind in terms of technology coming to the hands of farmers today. And if you look at whether it's Myanmar, Cambodia, and, or even developed countries like Malaysia, are we having, Apple, you get an Apple in US today, tomorrow you get in Asia. But in terms of technology for crop protection, you can delay for 6 to 7 years. By the time the climate change, adaptation and mitigation. Did I say something wrong?
I think you said something very wrong.
So to me, is
That's not you.
Don't use that.
Maybe try your
lapel mic.
Try that.
I'm going to try this by holding this softly. So my only request is to find a platform so that we can have regulatory efficiency within an ASEAN framework. That is my wish.
Yeah, can I just maybe just add to that? So I think that is going to be a critical lever, and a prerequisite of that is a more coherent industry body representing companies in this area, representing SMEs and interests of players in this area across Southeast Asia. And we just kicked off not too long ago the ASEAN Food and Beverage Alliance, just exactly with that intent. How can we create an industry body across ASEAN representing both multinationals and SMEs in this space, so that we can present to policymakers what is it that we need from industry point of view.
Thank you, David. In fact, could I ask Munir to pick up on that? Could I ask Munir to pick up on that? Because Munir was, Tan Sri was actually expanding about how ASEAN needs to hear from business voice. Is that a good idea, Munir?
Before that, I think you have to...
I think you better use the microphone. I can't hear you myself.
Before that, we have to bring farm to market. And to table, as you said, in a more efficient and modernized way. And you have to interest big business in that process of modernization. I think once big business is interested in something, they can begin to exert, to exert influence. This may not apply to rice, but certainly other products.
Palm oil.
Products.
Yeah. Palm.
I mean, in Vietnam, there are some one or two companies that I've met, which are working one or two companies I've met in Vietnam who are working together with the Japanese, with big investment, trying to have generating revenues of about 300 to 500 million US dollars, which is not small, for agriculture, to bring farm, to market in a more organized and modern way. That's one way to improve agriculture.
So you need to have the sort of the industry itself up to a certain shape and scale in order to actually have such a body, but it will be useful. There are a number of questions coming in, not so much by pigeonhole, but just good old pigeon being delivered to me. And a number of them relate specifically to Vietnam. If I could ask Mr. Phuong to respond to them. One is that there seem to be high land prices in Vietnam as a barrier to investors investing in agricultural business, and perhaps the scale of how do they overcome this. And related to that, a lot of questions about what is the typical rate of return on investment for agri project. What would you think as a banker in the sector?
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. First of all, what we see is in the market right now, lots of potential investors and current investors keep going to Vietnam and to look for the opportunity to work with companies, SMEs, and even for the farmers in order to make products in Vietnam, because we have very good advantages comparing to other areas in the world for the agriculture. So now it is important for Vietnam to get the investment. Right? Investment should be, of course, coming to the second question, if we talk about the ratio, return on equity or return on assets, in Vietnam, always we get a very high return. For instance, our bank, we have 15% of the return on equity, almost 0.95% on the return on assets, and based on the agriculture sector we have more average, higher than average of the return ratio. So it is quite, interesting to the foreign investors. But come back to the first. What we see is for the management and the skill, and also for the application of technology into, the companies and the farmers in Vietnam is very important right now. So that's why if the investors from Japan or other parts of the world with a very high technology and very high management skill, they can come here and partner up with our companies, our clients, in order to create, more production. And of course, when they bring in the technology like Japanese companies, they know very well how to preserve products, because some crops, some products need more time in order to get to the harbor of the importer, right? So that's why Japanese companies recently helped Vietnam a lot on this issue, and we see this is very productive cooperation.
So for the bank that actually lends money to companies as well as developers and agriculture, he's telling us that his returns on the agriculture business are actually above average, which is quite interesting. And despite the relatively high land prices, he's suggesting that the overall value chain can be managed by high technology and the value of the products in the end to make commercial sense. There was a gentleman right in the center there, and the microphone is right next to you. Please. Oh, sorry, not a gentleman, I'm blind. Please. Is that on?
Okay,
Yeah,
it's
ahead.
on now. My name is Saro. I'm with Pesticide Action Network, Asia and the Pacific. I had two questions. One is to Unilever. You talked about sustainability, and I'll be very interested to find out what are we talking about in terms of sustainability. Are we looking at human health and the protection of the environment? So how does that figure into sustainability? A second question, similar to CropLife, because you represent the big, chemical industry, and many of the pesticides that they produce, for example, Syngenta produces paraquat, and we know that it's not any longer allowed to be used in Europe, but it's widely used in Asia. So there seems to be a double standard here. So what is the kind of, and many pesticides are like that, banned in Europe and the US, but available in Asia. So what is the responsibility in terms of environmental health and human health? What is the kind of protection? Because we're not seeing that on the ground. Thank you.
Excellent question. Thank you very much. Perhaps one more question from the floor. Is there somebody else? Gentleman right here in white. Microphone's coming to you, please.
So,
it's on.
I have only one question to Professor Peter Tran. Because now we are Asian country. Also, we have some commercial products the same. So I ask you, how about the policy cooperation in terms of 1 or 2 or 3 countries for one kind of the commercial product? For example, Thailand, Vietnam cooperation by the right for the competition in the world market or something.
Good. So some questions about sustainability for our. But last one, perhaps Peter can come back to rice. Could countries cooperate rice? Who would like to go first? David, a direct question about Unilever and how you see sustainability.
Yeah, sure. So, sustainability is a very fat word. So, lots of things you can put under sustainability. I think for us, it's quite broad-reaching. So, we define sustainability both in economic terms, environmental terms, and social terms. And we look also at our full life cycle of our products. So not only the sustainability of our manufacturing, how much water we use, how much CO2 we produce in our manufacturing, but also in the consumer use of our products. So if a consumer uses our shampoo, how much water does he use, how much CO2 does he generate in heating that water when he uses our products in a washing machine, for example, and then also in the disposal of our products. So does it go to a landfill? What happens to the packaging after that? And so we take sort of quite a broad definition, and when we do that, several things come to light. So we find that, in fact, the sustainability footprint or the environmental footprint of the manufacturing is much smaller than we had imagined. So it's only about 12% of our CO2 emissions, for example. And the lion's share of our CO2 emissions is actually when consumers use our products. It's 70%. Transportation, which you might imagine is quite large, is actually only 2% of our CO2 emissions. So lots of different things come up when you take a holistic view of it. And I think that helps us also to be more focused on where we should go after in terms of making transformational change.
David, sorry if I may, that's a very good holistic way to look at it. I think the questioner was really more concerned about health and safety, and especially in a way, you got to the consumer, but I would think if she wants to go back to the grower, what does Unilever do in that sense?
Yeah, so for a farmer, there are several dimensions, I would say. So there is, of course, the livelihood dimension, and that's how do we ensure that farmers get a good source of income. A few months ago, in fact, we launched Grow Asia in Jakarta, and one of the phrases that we coined there was farmers by choice. How do we ensure that we build farming as a livelihood so that we have farmers who are farmers by choice rather than by force or with no other sort of option? So livelihood is a big component. Then I think helping, as Tan Sri said, helping farmers get access to the marketplace is a big part of that. So how do we help farmers improve their technology, improve their yields, improve their access to the market, and improve, I think, also sort of the way that they are able to work in cooperatives and get financing, for example. That's a second sort of area that we would look at in terms of the sustainability of that part of the supply chain.
Thank you, David. Jiang He, a very specific question from the lady.
Thank you very much for the question. First and foremost, we reach out to about 3 million farmers across Asia every year, either on a face-to-face or on through our partners across Asia, to ensure that the farmers get good agriculture practice. Reason being, GAP alone gives you a 50% benefit in the whole sustainability platform, because it comes through better input usage, better productivity with local what you call knowledge that is further enhanced to ensure the farmer gets the whole supply chain. But of course, it needs partnership with the other people who invest in the supply chain. Even if a farmers that produce a good quality crop without the whole post-harvest supply protection or coverage, it will not be able to attain the full potential crop value that the farmers has gone out to. So again, coming back to one of your questions is that whether a product is registered in Europe and not here or not, it is up to the usage of the particular country, or whereby if, for example, all palm does a lot of circle weeding, you use a certain chemistry, and then it is not an issue of safety and health. It is fundamentally whether the product is used in a particular country, and every country across Asia has a very sound regulatory system. The regulators are state of the art, even in Malaysia, Thailand, etc. So they do all their risk assessment in the local environment to address to the local use. So again, we as an industry participate very closely with the government for safe use, secure storage. That's why we train millions of farmers across, partnering PPD in Vietnam. We are launching program. We just finished a 350,000 household training in India. So having that, we have direct partnership together with government. Farmers essentially are a population of the society. We believe that together partnering government will bring the next set of benefits of a whole technology, having from farm to table.
Thank you, Sanghi. We've got about 15 to 20 minutes more at the most. So I'd like to try to keep it a bit shorter. I asked Peter about the question that Vietnamese gentleman here asked. Please, Peter.
And quickly, it's interesting. Rice is actually a success story for ASEAN. We have an ASEAN +3 rice reserve scheme that is officially enacted. That's actually not very important, but what is important is the platform. Twice a year, ASEAN leaders sit down and talk about rice stabilization, rice reserves, and the role of the broader community and individual actions. They don't actually, you commented on the decision-making process within ASEAN, they don't actually make any decisions about this, but it's on their own agenda every time. And what's really interesting, it was Philippines' bad behavior that blew up the rice market in 2007, 2008, and once that lesson was learned, we've had two food spikes since 2008 in wheat and corn. Rice has been very stable. That's because of the good behavior of individual countries under this ASEAN discussion forum. So I think we should at least give some credit to ASEAN for providing the venue where those discussions actually take place.
Good. In the last few minutes we have, I want to give the speakers perhaps 1 minute each at the end to either respond or to give a last point, all of them. But before that, let's take as many questions as we can. I've got one in my hand about Vietnamese government credit policy to really create this value chain promoted by the banks. How does it really benefit the small-scale farmers? Perhaps you can give us 1 or 2 examples, Mr. Phuong. I also had a hand over here. I think it's Daryl Weber of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. Daryl, would you put up your hand so the microphone can find you? Over there. Is there somebody else on this side of the room?
No, you're good.
No, we're okay. Daryl, would you go ahead?
Shall I? Oh, thanks.
Please.
Thanks, Simon. What I'd like to hear from the panelists is who in ASEAN is currently looking at the climate impacts on food staple production? It's something that I'm missing here, and we're talking about sustainability, and it's something that I miss in many agricultural forums in this region. Who is looking at this? Who's thinking about climate adaptability strategies? Thank you.
And the next speaker or questioner is my good friend Sutat. Kun Sutat was the ASEAN Deputy Secretary General, the trade rep for Thailand, and since Thailand has been mentioned so often, I thought I'd get Sutat to make a point or ask a question.
I quite impressed by the proposal that Peter has made to have a free trade area in rice. What do you think is a major constraint, and how should we address that?
Sure.
That's the question for you in particular. And how also can we use the APTA, which you just mentioned, to be the mechanism to achieve that? And how should the rice sector people actually get together and do that? Will that question from Vietnam help, to do that? This afternoon we have a session on rice, and I'd like to.
I'll be there.
Yeah, okay, good. So we'll have some more exchange over there. But I think for the general audience,
Sure.
agriculture, of course, is very sensitive. Government policy, environment. How do we desensitize it, given the current situation?
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Khun Sutat. So gentlemen, 1 to 2 minutes each to wrap up. May I start in the opposite order and come down to Mr. Phuong, just in order like this? David?
Yeah, sure. So I think lots of interesting discussions. For me, the core question we need to answer is sustainably produced agriculture more competitive? And you can talk about rice, for example. It's great to have more competitive rice, but is sustainably produced rice more competitive? And that's something for us to answer. And if we can answer that question, then I think companies will buy into it, governments will buy into it, and we will create a supply chain that is more sustainable for agriculture.
Right. Thank you, David. That's a very good question, and one really to be answered. Is it more costly and inefficient to be sustainable, or can it be both sustainable as well as all those other attributes? Peter, please.
Just quickly on the impediments to free trade. Look, I know it's not going to happen. Rice farmers are the single largest identifiable voting bloc in every country in Asia, starting in Japan and going all the way down. It is entirely possible that rice in Japan will scuttle the TPP agreement because the U.S. is pushing very hard for Japan to open up, and Japan is pushing back very hard. I think politically it's very, very difficult. I think about new technologies in social safety nets as perhaps offering some opportunities to get very small-scale rice farmers out of the business if we have other opportunities for them and transitional safety nets that would allow them to find other opportunities. But I don't see any way we can get to free trade because the price of rice determines their income. We need to find an income solution to this, not just a trade solution.
And Peter, would you like to add 1 more minute about more general wrap-up to the session? Is that right? You've been fine. Okay.
I get 15 minutes after that.
Okay. Tan Sri.
Okay, Simon, thanks. I mean, if I was asked what was the main problem facing agriculture in ASEAN, I would say, one, national, because it's always seen as a national problem all the time. Two, natural, because there are a lot of natural issues that come up. You have rain in Bangkok and drought in rice-growing areas, but because it's seen as national, the natural issues are then addressed nationally as well. And three, financial. So I would say national issue is a problem because it's seen as national. Natural problems, things about climate change and so on. And financial, because there has to be finance for the small chaps particularly. And therefore, I would say we address these three. ASEAN addresses these things very good. In terms of safety, for example, there's an ASEAN lab proposal for in terms of safety of products, but the labs have not been up in all ASEAN countries. There are standards for those labs to examine, the safety of goods. And so the problem is, if we can surmount those three issues, then we have nice solutions, nice sounding solutions. The thing is enablement of solutions through domestic rules and regulations and legislation. That's sadly lacking. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Peter? I would take that 1 minute on the sustainability issue. Agricultural commodities grown sustainably will not be cheaper as long as non-sustainable production techniques do not have to pay for the environmental costs that they incur. Until we can figure out some way to internalize those environmental costs, the water costs, the pollution costs, all of it. Unless we can internalize those, sustainable products will cost more, and you'll have to ask consumers to pay more because they see the difference.
Okay. So a real challenge, there's a real challenge at the national level, not just to get the basic policies right, but the sustainability policies right, to get the pricing right. Good.
I think what the question was, climate smart agriculture that you posed just now. I think at the United Nations framework, FAO actually have a new agenda for climate smart agriculture, and it's covered under the CFS 43 this year, which is Committee for Food Security and on UNFCCC for climate change. I think a lot of the member states have representatives into those committees, and how we're going to bring it back to the ASEAN Secretariat for a particular agenda to discuss. Right now it's trickling in as the articles of responsible agriculture, women in agriculture, land tenure issues coming in together to ensure that climate smart agriculture gets a holistic view, so that we can propel having a 21st century technology to incorporate with it, so that we can increase productivity and sustainability. So coming back to my last 1 minute is consistency and commitment for agriculture policy. Right now, we're seeing whether it's FDI in within ASEAN countries needs to be consistent. We all know that government changes, but policy needs to be stable. Agriculture is not a factory, it's not a hard disk factory or a chip factory. I can come in, bring a factory from Australia, put it there for 6 months to get it into running. Agriculture, from soil conservation to turn a rice field to a corn field, takes you 7 years to actually achieve that optimum yield. Agriculture, my call is we need consistent and strong agriculture policy. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Phuong, I come to you last because you have a number of specific questions to you about Vietnam, and I'm very glad to do so, because here we are in Vietnam, not just as a stage, but really as a country that has seen a boom in certain commodities, challenges in certain sectors like rice, and also a large proportion of your population is still on the land. You're a banker, you've been making money out of this, and hopefully, kind of win-win. Please do share us your closing thoughts and answer the question.
For wrapping up, what I see is I have two opinions. One is on the ASEAN region. ASEAN region will be there by the end of this year. And of course, every country needs to think bigger as a whole, the united market for the needs of the world, global context. So that's why what I see is we need to see the transfer, by technology and management skill among the countries in the ASEAN community. And of course, each country needs to create the investment environment preferable for the investors, so that ASEAN countries like Singapore, which have very good technology and expertise, can come to other countries like Vietnam to invest. And also we look, the second aspect is for the national, like Vietnam. What I see is for the bankers or the commercial banks in Vietnam, it is a very good time to attract and to be the contact point, reliable contact point to the clients, including the domestic and international investors, clients, to come to Vietnam and to work together with the farmers to create the very good value chain based on the model of PPP, or even we integrate the scientists and also the corporations, including the distributor, trader, and financial institutions, in order to make the more equal for the income distribution, not only for the corporates, but also for the farmers. The very important, labor force of Vietnam and other ASEAN countries right now.
Thank you. The Singapore Institute of International Affairs, the think tank that I chair in Singapore, really spends a lot of time looking at ASEAN. When we look at our region, though, we realize that while ASEAN is coming together, as many of our speakers emphasize, the pillars remain the countries and therefore the national policies. In this area of agriculture, you really see the sensitivity and the different efforts and directions some of them are pulling. There are opportunities both at the regional level and the national level to get it right, so it becomes more sustainable, more sufficient, and more stable, with greater value to really create equitable growth, not only for the industry as a whole, but at the farm. I think there are many more questions, but I'm afraid we're out of time. Tony's already here to warn me I'm out of time. And more than that, there will be sessions after this which are quite similar, and Peter, of course, as he said, will be speaking again. So please join me in thanking our panelists for a very engaging session. Thank you very much.